So just doing a quick mic check if people can hear us through the Zoom.
Abigail, can you let us know if you can hear us?
I can, thank you.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We want to thank everyone for coming out today and attending this session on using an equity and inclusion lens to review forest preserve site names on this beautiful Earth Day, even though Earth Day is every day. And we just want to start off with some quick forest preserve of Cook County facts. How many of you have been to a forest preserve? You can raise your hand. Great. Or if you're online, you can use an emoji if you like. It seems that most of us are familiar with the forest preserves, but again, just going to say a quick few facts. The forest preserves of Cook County are the oldest and largest forest preserves in the whole entire nation. We are actually older than the National Park Service, which many people are usually surprised to hear that. We're also we hold the most biodiversity in the whole state of Illinois. Can anyone guess the most biodiverse site in Chicago? Michelle, would you know what's the most biodiverse site in
It's a
Chicago?
little bit like cheating, but I'm gonna go with Powderhorn.
It is Powderhorn. So,
In the Calumet.
in the Calumet region. And not only do we hold the most biodiversity, but we also hold the most cultural diversity in the state as well. So we in the forest preserves believe that we are not only restoring the forest preserves and managing them, but we're also helping to promote the cultural diversity that is within this Grant County that we serve. And as you can see from this first slide, there's a variety of activities that you can come out to do in the forest preserves, such as hiking, such as canoeing. You can come and help take care of the forest preserves, which we so need. And now we're going to move on to the next slide.
Maybe.
All right, right here. There you go. Okay, so we're going to do quick introductions. Michelle?
Hi, ich bin Michelle Uting, ich komme aus München, Bayern und lebe in Chicago seit 1979. Es freut mich, hier zu sein und mit euch zu sprechen. My name is Michelle Uting, I'm from Munich, Germany. I came to Chicago when I was 10 years old, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Hola, buenas tardes. Yo me llamo Raquel Garcia Alvarez. He vivido aquí en Chicago toda mi vida. Trabajo para las reservas forestales como coordinadora de programas de cuidado y desigualdad racial. Y también mi familia viene de Yuriria, Guanajuato, que es el territorio purépecha. Y también inicié una organización que se llama Ambientalistas de Color. So I just want to welcome everyone. My name is Raquel. I use she, her, ella pronouns. I'm a program coordinator with the Forest Preserves Cook County. Focus on stewardship and racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'm also part of the READY committee. My family is from Yuriria, Guanajuato, which is also Purépecha territories. There is the Purépecha name, Yuriria Pundaro. And I'm also the founder of Environmentalists of Color, and we are both very pleased to be here with you today. We're going to start off with our land acknowledgements of sharing the land acknowledgement statements of the Forest Preserves of Cook County. The Forest Preserves of Cook County acknowledges that we are on the lands of the Council of Three Fires, the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi, as well as the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sauk, and Meswaki's peoples. As a land management agency, we acknowledge that we have played a role in shaping the histories of local Native Americans by acquiring this land. We also recognize, share, and celebrate their immemorial ties to this land. We commit ourselves to developing deeper partnerships that advocate for the progress, dignity, and humanity of the many diverse Native Americans who still live and practice their heritage and traditions on this land today. We first read this land acknowledgement statement on Indigenous Peoples Day in 2019 when we opened up and celebrated the Serpent Twin Mound installation at Schiller Woods. We use this land acknowledgement not only as an acknowledgement, but also as a policy tool to continue to deepen our relationships with Native Americans. Us being here today and sharing the work is part of that continuing collaboration that we hope to further in the future. Because the forest preserves, as I mentioned, is taking very seriously racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. We created a committee a few years ago after this horrible racial hate crime at Caldwell Woods, which brought to the forefront what people of color were saying to us, that they did not feel welcome or as safe in the forest preserves. And we formed this Ready Committee soon after. We lead with the mission that we envision the forest preserves promoting inclusiveness of services and enjoyment to all residents of Cook County. Our actions will reflect these values by treating all people with respect. Some of the things that make the Ready Committee really special is that it really is a ground up approach. As you can, we're a diverse group of individuals from all different staff throughout the forest preserves. Here you see a picture, we have our police, we have landscape maintenance, we have our fleets and facility all participating in this endeavor to make the forest preserves better. And we really lead with equity benefits everyone, and that operationalizing equity will just make the forest preserves more inclusive and a better place to work and for people to come and enjoy.
Part of that equity and inclusion work is the names of our forest preserves. So we have a very large system that we help care for and manage. It's about 594 names. And we recognize that names play a very important practical role, right? They help us find our way, they provide direction, they help us get from point A to point B. So names are really important. It's important to be consistent. Names also help to create a sense of place and belonging. That's especially important in public areas. And names also help us celebrate and acknowledge significant plants, animals, geologic features, important cultural events and stories. So that is really important, but names also can do the opposite of making us feel welcome. They can, many times when there are names that represent people that were, or events that promoted inequities or celebrate a very painful event, those names can lead to a subtle oppression and can also make us feel unwanted. It's also important to note that there are names that we don't see or hear, and that also can contribute to feeling invisible. And so the Forest Preserves was doing a lot of thinking about that. Naming the preserves has always been like a process. So in 1923, the Forest Preserves was formally established between time for it to be officially adopted, because we are a local government agency. So in 1923, then the Forest Preserve's General Superintendent appointed a committee on nomenclature, and they were charged with naming the first forest preserves that were around. And so that's what they did. By 1924, they had named 24 sites, including Somme Prairie, Potawatomi Woods, and Deer
Grove.
Deer Grove. Sorry,
Camp Reinberg.
Sorry, I was blanking on the word grove. Yeah. And Deer Grove, which is also incidentally the very first acquisition that the Forest Preserve named. And then after that 1923-24 year, this committee gradually dissipated and went away. And so then you see a very large gap between 1924 and about 2010. The forest reserves continue to grow because we're currently at almost 70,000 acres. And the names of those forest reserves were given with very little input, probably no public input. And were named by Forest Reserve staff, commissioners, elected officials, and influential individuals. And so when our general superintendent, our current one, Arnold Randall, came on board, he, in addition to his incredible administrative skills and his commitment to transparency, he also really understood the power of names. And he was really encouraging the forest reserves to become more transparent and consistent and thoughtful in how we name sites. So he established a naming committee, which includes forest reserve staff from a whole variety of departments, as well as 2 partner organizations. And that committee then proceeded to do a review of all the forest reserve names, because in the last 100 years, some names had been officially adopted, others were commonly known as, and it just presented a lot of confusion. And as a lot of information moved online and Google Maps, and it became really important that we were all referring to the site with the same name. So the naming committee undertook that. In its process, it also decided to create a permanent naming policy, and this policy was established to really guide us and to prevent kind of willy-nilly naming of forest reserves and ensuring a public transparent process. It took some time for us to pull this report together. So you see it took probably a good 2 to 3 years, and then we were able to take that report and recommendations to the Board of Commissioners, and they signed off on it. So in 2018, we had our first comprehensive clean list of names. While we were doing this review, where we also engaged the field museums, a few professors, the Illinois State Archaeological Society, and the American Indian Center, we did come upon a really problematic and offensive name, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But that also made us realize we had to do a much more careful going through of all the names. And so we established the Equity, Cultural Sensitivity, and Inclusion Task Force in 2021. This is a committee that was appointed by President Preckwinkle. And it is around for 1 year, and it has a very specific task, and we can get into that a little bit more later.
Michelle, can you tell us how many names there are in the forest preserves?
No, Raquel, how many names are there in the forest reserves?
Can anyone in the audience guess? Like to guess? 150? Anyone in the chat? There are 560 forest preserve names. Does anyone want to take a guess of how many are named after women?
9.
9. There you go, Michelle. Very good. We have a
lot of work to do.
Good guess too, Abigail. 0. Abigail's guess 0, and that's not far from 9.
So this is just a slide to, again, I want to underscore the importance of this permanent naming policy. I also want to mention this permanent naming policy was developed at a time when the Forest Reserves was also exploring other ways to raise money for its limited budget. One of the suggestions was sponsorship. And so the Forest Reserves recognized right away that sponsorship can be a really good idea, but we also wanted to make certain that we protected the names and the natural and cultural significance of our forest reserves. So the permanent naming policy definitely also helps us address that. So there that is.
Since we are here today to learn about the waterways of life, we decided that not only was this example appropriate because it talked about water, we want to share that the Forest Preserves manages 91 bodies of water, which includes lakes, ponds, and sloughs, and that is about over 1,700 acres that within the Forest Preserves. And as Michelle mentioned, during the naming committee review, we found that one of the bodies of water had an offensive name. And while the Forest Preserves, took immediate action and removed it from a forest preserve maps and in our any other place where it was written down, this derogatory name still existed out in the Google world. And, we had collaborated with community partners, such as the American Indian Center, the Field Museum, and the Illinois State Archaeological Service. And we all were in agreement that this name needed to be removed and no longer needed to be out in the Google world. But with anything associated with the internet, it took a little bit of digging to find out what was the process. We worked with the United States Board of Geographic Names, Domestic Names Committee, as all government agencies do. We like to create complicated names for our committees and task force. And we put it in the paperwork, and we soon later found out that we had to go to a different committee to submit additional paperwork because, and this was submitted to the newly established Derogatory Geographic Names Task Force, which it was created under the new Department of Interior leader, Deborah Holland. So the task force is charged with removing any offensive derogatory names from all public lands. So we have submitted the paperwork and we're anxiously awaiting for it to be approved. So that way this derogatory name is no longer in the internet space. And we have also been working collaboratively with the American Indian Center, and they are the ones that help to recommend that we rename this area Muskrat Slough. And here you can see a picture of the bodies of water. Even though it may look like 4 different dots, they are all one wetland complex, one slough complex. On this next slide, you will see a bigger map of the Palos area where Muskrat Slough is found. And
Raquel, if I can just interject, one of the reasons that this name kind of was hidden in some ways is because the slough is not a place that you would direct people to. So the Forest Preserves is always really hyper focused on places that, are like an entry point or a trailhead. Muskrat Slough was really like an internal reference. There's no parking lot, there's no trail to the site. But still, water bodies do tend to be named. And once you name a water body, you do have to go through this fairly extensive process to get it renamed. We're really hopeful that because of the Department of Interior's new order, that the process will be a lot faster because that task force is specifically focused on removing this slur. So.
Yeah. And if anyone has any questions about the process, we're more than happy to act as a resource. So we want to share this powerful quote from Secretary Holland. Racist terms have no place in our vernacular or on our federal lands. Our nation's lands and waters should be places to celebrate the outdoors and our shared cultural heritage, not to perpetrate the legacies of oppression, said Secretary Holland. Today's actions will accelerate an important process to reconcile derogatory place names and mark a significant step in honoring the ancestors who have stewarded our land since time immemorial. And I really want to point out that our public lands nor the lands within Turtle Island should perpetrate the legacies of oppression. And that is also part of the lens that we have been looking at with this new task force that we're going to talk about.
So this Equity, Cultural Sensitivity, and Inclusion Task Force, we just wanted to share with you kind of the makeup of it. So we really wanted to make sure we have full, representation from our READY committee. Also, you'll note that we have 2 members of our Board of Commissioners. So the Board of Commissioners obviously is very important. At the end of the day, they have the final say on everything that has to do with the forest preserves. So it's really important to have their support and buy-in from the beginning. So we're really pleased that they are very much part of these conversations. Here are just the names. You will also note that we have 2 representatives from Loyola University's Public History program. That's because the Forest Preserves we had a little bit of funding and we were able to hire them to do research on our names. As you can imagine, reviewing so many names really requires experts to do the research. So one of the things that we emphasized with Loyola is that our top priority is for them to review all the names to make sure there is nothing offensive and derogatory anymore on the list. And then their second priority is to review the individuals, the preserves that are named after individuals. And these are sometimes, local politicians, national politicians. It can also be the name potentially of the person who owned the land before the forest preserves assumed management of it. So it really runs the gamut, and doing the research and finding out what these people stood for or whether or not they promoted what they promoted really requires historians. So we're really grateful to have Loyola, and they're in the process of doing, it's a project that they're actually doing with their students. So that's been really great too. The task force is then charged, it's just started meeting in the last 4 or 5 months. They have been working really hard to develop a template, a review criteria, so that we are reviewing everyone with the same fair lens. That has taken some time to come up with this template, but we have it now. It may still continue to evolve as our conversations evolve. These are sometimes very difficult conversations to have, how you are viewing people, from 80 years ago who may have had a great environmental voting record in Congress, but then maybe were less stellar at home. So they're complex, hard conversations that we're having. But we are trying to remember that we have these disqualifications if you promoted or advanced inequities, that you are disqualified. And then we have these other considerations, that we really want to keep top of mind, whether the name reflects things that relate back to the forest preserves, represents a historically impacted or marginalized community, etc., as you can see on there. So that's the stage we're at now. We hope to have this process done, at least of reviewing the individual names, before the end of the year. And we are looking forward to the many conversations that I think we will have. And then this task force will make recommendations on the names, and perhaps we'll also make, we're hoping, recommendations on how the forest preserves should proceed with new opportunities for naming. So should we pay, I'm making this up right now, but these are some of the conversations we've had. Should we consider in particular adding names of women or of indigenous people or of making sure that African American history is represented in the names. So those kinds of, we will see what the task force does, but we anticipate that they may also make some recommendations like that to guide our future naming efforts. And so that is what I would say about that.
And, being part of this committee has been really interesting because, as Michelle mentioned, the process, the site naming process that the forest preserves had went away. They had this nomenclature and then it kind of just went away. And some of our coworkers have shared, people would just call and say, hey, can you please find a site for Michelle Uting because she's a really great person and we need to celebrate that she has been in service for 20 years and there was no public process, and then Michelle got a forest preserve name after her, even if she might not have had any connection to the forest preserve or did anything for nature. It was just like someone called or maybe donated some land and then it was just named after them. So we're trying to be very thoughtful with this process and make sure that as we're having these conversations that we're honoring the contributions that people had before, if they were good people, but just didn't align with the forest preserve mission or didn't have anything to do. So these are just some of the conversations that we've been having. And these conversations are again important because words matter. And as we've been on this ready journey, we've shared and that we have heard from many people who are big advocates of the forest preserves or of nature that they just don't feel seen or welcome. And this is a really another powerful quote from Carmen Rodriguez, who's founder of Hate Has No Home Here. And Hate Has No Home Here was a big partner with us after the Caldwell Woods hate crime incident. She participated in the 2018 Cultural Forum, and she said, how can the forest preserves ensure that everyone feels welcome? You must declare it, put it out there. Right now, everything is in English. Nothing is intentionally talking to me. Don't just talk about parties and events, talk about quinceañeras and say it to as many people as you can. And we've shared this quote with during some of our diversity and inclusion roundtable conversations. And it's hit home in so many different ways. Like we had another young Latina woman say, I never even thought about having a quinceañera in the forest preserve. But now that I see that it's a possibility, maybe I would have done it in the forest preserve because you can rent out multiple picnic groves and there's a lot of different possibilities, but people may not know they can do these things because we're just always saying, come out and have a picnic instead of saying, come out and have your quinceañera here or come out and have mariachi or any other cultural activity here in the forest preserves. Because again, the forest preserves, we manage 70,000 acres throughout Cook County and we want people to be able to enjoy them. One of the individuals that Loyola is currently reviewing, as we mentioned, they're reviewing over 200 place names for us is Alexander Robinson Woods. How many of you know the story of Alexander Robinson? No? So we have quite a few sites named after Native Americans. Robinson Woods is one of them. Caldwell Woods is another one. Sauganash is another one. Sauganash is the Native American name for Caldwell Woods, OBN. So as they're doing the deep history of these names, we want to mention some pretty interesting facts about Robinson Woods. I hate to say facts because we know that he was born in 1787 and he lived to April 22nd, 1872. So it is his birthday today. Another reason why we are bringing him up. He was born on Mackinac Island to an Odawa woman and a Scot. He is largely known as being a fur trader. And after the War of 1812, he settled in the Chicagoland area, and he began to move away from fur trading and act as a translator to local Native American tribes, beginning with the Treaty of St. Louis. So he was the translator liaison between local Native American tribes and the US government. And because of his participation, or because of his role, he was given some land along the Des Plaines River Valley area. And anecdotally or affectionately, his land is called the last private reservation in Illinois, because we know that the last federal reservation in Illinois was in 1833 or so. So the Robinson Woods has been working, we've been working with them collaboratively to honor the Robinson history at these various woods that also encompass Schiller Woods. You can go to those woods and see this monument to the family, and we just wanted to provide a space if anyone would like to share any history they may know about any of the names of the forest preserves, or a fun fact or something interesting that they didn't realize, like, I didn't know this name meant this. And if you're online, you can unmute yourself. Well, I'll go ahead and share that. For me, I was surprised that only one forest preserve site was named after a Latina or a Latino, and that is our Irene Hernandez on the north side, which is part of the larger La Bosse site and is very popular. And Irene Hernandez was celebrated because she had such a strong civic duty to serving the people of Cook County and bringing lots of different resources to people. Any questions? So the next slide is like, how would you like to be involved? And you can put it again in the chat or here. You know, we are the naming of the new forest preserve sites will go through a public engagement process, you know, so you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram or join one of our newsletter and be informed on when these future sites may be renamed. We have a few sites in the Northwest region that we're looking to rename because they're new acquisitions. Yes, Randy? Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay. So,
Questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kill the recording and then.
okay, so thank you everyone for attending the presentation. We're gonna now move on to the questions and stop recording. Still recording.